time to tap back into the seerah and the biography of the Prophet ﷺ. Islamophobia is not new, by the way. Islamophobia was around at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, 1400 years ago. The tools are the same. How we deal with it is exactly the same. So we need to realign ourselves with our seerah, with our teachings, and extract the tools in order to allow us to deal with these issues better, inshallah. Nasir, I'm sure you have more political...
I could listen, I can...
Welcome to the Out of Interest podcast, Ramia, Nasir, and thank you so much for coming last minute. We were going to have Sarah on, but you jumped on like a hero last minute and you came on. Do really appreciate that. But firstly, I do want to say one thing, and that is 3 of you are actually nominated for Muslim Achievement Awards. 3 of you are finalists. I don't know if you guys know that, but they are the finalists for the Muslim Achievement Awards. I do want to give a round of applause for that one as well. Now, I think it was Nasir and Asala, they are in the same category. I'm going to ask Ramia, who's your money on to win that? I think it was what, People's Choice of the Year?
No.
Who's your money on?
Oh, they're both just as amazing. And
don't give a political answer.
Be diplomatic. Anyone who wins is a win for everyone. Honestly, they're both amazing assets to the community.
Yep, 100% I agree. But like promised, my first question was going to be for you, Nasir. I'm going to get straight to it. I'm not going to muck around. Let's get straight into the questions. Let me just quickly check what time it is so we keep track of time. All right. My first question, Nasir. There's been a lot of talk, obviously, with what's happening around the world. But the US, before October 7, were talking about how the Middle East is quieting down. There's not much rubble's happening. And then, boom, this happened. So my question is, do you think Hamas ruined the peace in the Middle East?
No, I don't think they ruined peace in the Middle East, and anybody that thinks there was peace on the 6th of October is living in a fantasy land. We have to be realists. What is peace? Peace without justice is not peace. What is quiet and the opportunity for people to live their day-to-day lives and to thrive in a capitalist society or an economy and travel and enjoy the wonders of the dunya isn't peace. Whilst the population, and we should, in the micro sense, look at what's happening in Palestine and Gaza, but then extrapolate that, what Western hegemony has done throughout the Middle East, whether it's a taste of democracy to Libya or Iraq or Afghanistan, there is no peace. Now, so their concept, this Western imperial concept of peace, is the absence of violence, and I can still go to the shops.
Yeah.
Only 2 months before October 7, Benjamin Netanyahu was at the United Nations with a map of the new Middle East, and he was talking and extolling the virtues of the Abraham Accords, that talks were advancing with Saudi Arabia, and he was there, where I was issued with a concerns letter by an Australian Jewish guy, and he wanted me, a concerns letter as a legal notice and an opportunity for me to address before he takes legal action. And the concerns note was he wanted me to give me the opportunity to explain why he shouldn't sue me for inciting violence against the Jewish people of Australia, for demanding that Palestine be free from the river to the sea. And we know what Palestine free from the river to the sea means. It means everybody's free, not just half the people, which is the current situation.
Can you explain a bit about that? What does that really mean, free from the river to the sea? Can you explain that part a bit?
So, today Israel is an apartheid regime.
Yeah.
Today, depending on how you celebrate God, your life and livelihood, your access to resources, your ability to travel, where you might live, is entirely determined by how the nation state of Israel determines your nationality. Now, if you are, and the 2018 nation state law said that self-determination for people in Israel would be determined based for the Jewish people and the Jewish people alone. So that means that if you're not Jewish, self-determination, the right to represent yourself and to belong to a land, isn't available. And as we know, this is the land given to Abraham, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, our prophet, and to all of his children. And all of his children are all of the children of Abraham, whether they be Muslim, Christian, or Jew. So today, in that area between the river and the sea, there is one authority that manages the birth registry, the death registry. the incoming people, the outgoing people, the economy, taxation, roads, building permits, every level of every person's life is controlled by the Israeli government. Now, if you're Jewish, you get to vote and you get the benefit of that. And if you're not, you get a level of apartheid. And I did a presentation on my Instagram of the 8 different types of Palestinians that can have an impact on apartheid. And obviously the 8th worst place to be as a Palestinian is Gaza, as we've seen. But just very quickly to come back, the absence of conflict to be a notion of peace. This is a very Western imperialistic notion that my life is okay, so I'm at peace. And if your peace is predicated on my oppression, if your peace is predicated on my dispossession and continued pain, you can't possibly expect to have peace into perpetuity.
Hasala, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I actually, first of all, would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting today. I think it's important to acknowledge that we are on stolen land, and in saying that and speaking about from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. In the 1960s, Yasser Arafat, the leader of the PLO, called for a one-state solution. And Palestinians in the diaspora created the chant from the river to the sea in recognition that Palestine is from the Jordanian River to the Mediterranean Sea. And when we're saying the Jordanian River to the Mediterranean Sea, we're speaking about an end to the occupation. We're speaking about an end to the siege of Gaza. We're not only speaking about the plight of Palestinians who are currently living under occupation, but we're also speaking about the plight of Palestinians who live in the diaspora, like me, like Uncle Nasser, like Ramia, who can return back home. And peace doesn't go in hand with occupation. And something that I've been really reflecting on is that what does peace look like in Palestine? You know? But that's not for us to really speak about what a potential free, like what peace is going to look like in 20 years' time. Because there have been so many external stakeholders that have tried to determine what peace is for Palestinians. Let us determine what Palestine and peace would look like for us, for once. In 2020, when Trump had proposed the peace plan, during that time I was still a student at uni. I was trying to really think like, who's this white guy trying to determine how my people should live? So it's enough in external parties trying to dictate on what peace can look like in Palestine. We are the experts of our lives. We are the experts where we have been handed down the stories of our grandmothers that have taught us what peace could look like. So we will look back to that to say what peace can look like.
Fair enough.
Can I just build on the question?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Good.
Pressing, just interjection. One of the things, again, the conversation does not begin on 7th of October, right? That's clear amongst the masses, and it begins long before then. And one of the most important things, I guess, that we need to weave into the conversation is that resistance is legalized against occupation. And in fact, a United Nations resolution in the 1990s not only legalizes resistance, it actually sanctifies, to the extent, armed resistance against any occupier. And I think we need to be very clear on that, because that question on, and I'm not going to ask it because I'm sick of being asked it on what our perceptions and what our, point of views are on Hamas and so forth. But taking Hamas out of the equation, Palestinians have an absolute right to resistance. And it's sanctified in international, it's actually encouraged. So you can't expect a population, I'm talking Gaza specific, but even the West Bank, from what we're seeing unfold, it doesn't, two-state solutions don't work, as we've seen demonstrated in the West Bank. But every single Palestinian within and outside of Palestine have an absolute right of resistance. But for those who have been suffocated, blockaded, held under siege, dictated as to what food, drink, services they're going to have, how much access to electricity, how much access to internet they're going to have, they have an absolute right to resistance. So when we see the, events unfold, this is not the start of what we expect. We're nearing an end or a beginning of a new revolution, really, because the people are fed up. So we have to make it very clear. Resistance to occupation is legal and it's expected under international law.
Fair enough. Now, obviously, there's a lot of overwhelming support for Palestine because it's a humanitarian crisis. But I'd be very keen to pick your mind, Ramia, about the Islamic context of all this as well. Because Palestine, the land of Palestine, is a blessed land. But oftentimes, a lot of our younger generation in particular, who aren't as well versed in the history and whatnot, are caught up in what they're seeing in the media, and that's where they're getting behind the cause. But I think it goes much, much deeper than just that. So could you educate and enlighten us in that regard?
I think the conversation needs to be twofold, and the audience that you are addressing is very important in how to steer that conversation. So when I am speaking to a Muslim audience, I will absolutely weave and wean into it the Islamic connection that we have to Palestine. It is a blessed land. We know Al-Aqsa was the first Qibla for every Muslim. There is a religious sanctification and sacredness to the land. And hence, no matter what race you are, as a Muslim, I'm saying specifically here, there is a connection to that land from that aspect. The blessed journey of the Isra and the Mi'raj that the Prophet, peace be upon him, undertook took place in and around that blessed land. He received the gift of prayer and salah in the seven heavens, not on earth. There is a lot of, deep-rooted Islamic, connection to the land. But what's very important to note is that we cannot also just limit the issue to just a Muslim issue. It becomes very dangerous, and it actually feeds into the narrative of the other side. When you limit it to a Muslim issue, absolutely we need to reinforce, educate the particular audience that we are addressing. But, I'm talking if your children go to Islamic schools, it needs to be enshrined in curriculum. If you have, Saturday schools, students need to understand the importance of Al-Aqsa, particularly to the Muslim. And I'll share this experience. When my husband and I visited Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa specifically in 2014, and you ask the locals, what is it that we can do for you? How can we help you? They say, keep remembering us, make dua for us, keep visiting us, but also tell the ummah to rectify its condition and repair its condition, because the Aqsa is the thermometer of the ummah. When there is, a heightened level of iman and deep-rooted belief in Allah Azza wa Jal, you'll see victory in Al-Aqsa. When you see the ummah at its lowest in terms of iman, you'll see defeat. And we see that throughout our Islamic history. There's no two ways about it. But when we are addressing a broader audience, we need to take that, expand that approach, and bring in the humanitarian aspect, the principles that every single human with a moral compass dictates and operates under. So, for example, justice, equality, self-determination, right to autonomy, being against ethnic cleansing, being against occupation, genocide, and so forth. So I think this is a conversation that's very critical, particularly within our circles, that if you are exclusively in a Muslim audience, by all means, reinforce the Islamic aspect, and it's very important that we do understand our Islamic history and so forth and connection to the land. But on a broader context, we need to also expand that perspective.
But also in the West, as advocates and as people who are endeavouring to build a movement, understanding that endeavouring to liberate Palestine singularly, aside from all of the other struggles, marginalises us from the opportunity to grow our movement, but also makes it much easier for our adversaries to make it a Muslim
Muslim
issue.
issue.
And as human beings, as people of faith, we believe, and I'm sure I say this, I'm sure that my sisters agree, that none of us is free unless all of us are free. And so it's so very important for us to be talking, absolutely grounding our advocacy in our faith, but also understanding that there absolutely is a connection. And good on us, Salah, for being better than all of us and doing an acknowledgement, and which we should and must always do, because we are the Israelis here. We're the settlers, and we need to understand that there is a connection between that struggle. And there's a connection with so many other dispossessed and despised peoples around the world.
Can you explain to us how does a free Palestine look like? Everyone cheers for free Palestine. Explain to us what that really looks like. Does that mean where Israel gives their lands to Palestine, or can you guys delve a bit into that? Like,
So
what
I've
are
got
we
a
cheering
really
for?
simple answer for that.
Yep.
Yeah? And my dad grew up in the 20s. So in 1917, the Ottoman Empire ended, and the Arabs, who were Islamophobes then, fought with Lawrence of Arabia and defeated the Ottoman Empire and got freedom. Well, everybody got freedom except for the Palestinians. But my dad was born in the 20s, and back in those days, he played marbles. That's what kids did. There was no video games. And Avraham, and Ibrahim played marbles together. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. On Friday, Ibrahim went to mosque. On Saturday, Avraham went to temple. And on Sunday, Abraham went to church. And inshallah, each of you get to go to Jerusalem, and you'll see the Wailing Wall, Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So the holiest site for Jews, our first Qibla, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Christians believe Jesus was crucified. The three of them is from the front of the car park to here, 300 or 400 meters. On Monday, Abraham, Avraham, and Ibrahim played marbles again. What does a free Palestine look like? A free Palestine looks like you live your life as a human being free of the dictation that your journey and your life and where you can live and what you can do is dictated by the womb that you came from. And if the womb you came from today is Jewish, you're special, and the rest of us are cannon fodder. Free Palestine looks like all of Abraham's children are free.
Yeah. Asala, can you explain to us about that? What Israel is saying right now is they are protecting themselves from Hamas, right? That's their reasoning for what they're doing, which we call pretty much a genocide, what they're doing. Do you think that's a valid reason for what they're doing, or is there a secret campaign that they have to genuinely actually create a cultural cleansing over here? Because again, they're going to the West saying this is, we're protecting ourselves from Hamas. Or are you saying, or are we saying that they have a Sikhi campaign behind doors that, this is our reason to actually cleanse the Palestinians?
I guess the transition of a question about a free Palestine and now speaking about Israel and self-defense is a bit of a hard transition because I got a bit emotional because going into the imagination of a free Palestine is one that's very emotional. But how can we see a free Palestine with the presence of the Israeli occupation? So if we're talking about the Israeli occupation, they're constantly utilizing certain rhetoric to justify their actions. And one of the rhetorics that they've used is in claim of self-defense. And a lot of the international organizations, if we want to go into, what has international organizations found is that the level that they have utilized in response goes beyond self-defense, if that's what we want to say. But if I want to say from my own perspective, Ka'asala, I will say Israel doesn't have a right to defend itself because Israel's existence, their own existence, they don't have a right to exist. So where does that right of self-defense come if their own existence is not of right? But in saying that, I just want to go back into the topic of resistance. Occupation is a crime. Their existence is a crime. So when a Palestinian resists or responds to a genocide or to the massacres, or to be living in restriction of movement, restriction of education, restriction of access to health, water, to be restricted, to be held by the neck, how do you expect a human to respond? It's in human nature to respond when you're living under circumstances like that. I've said it before and I'll say it today. Power to all forms of resistance. Palestinians have a right to resist when they are living under circumstances like that. Does Israel have a right to self-defense? Does Israel have a right to exist in the first place? That's what the question should be.
Can I just build on that? One of the fallacies, I guess, that Israel has tried to put forward, and Ilan Pappé, he's an Israeli historian, talks about this in his myths, the 10 myths of Israel, is there is an almost innate belief that they are trying to transcend to the masses, that a colonizer ultimately does have the right to self-defense. A colonizer cannot have, a settler colony cannot have a right to self-defense. You are illegally occupying a land in which is not yours. It's almost ironic and hypocritical to even make that claim. So one of the most important things that we need to understand, these are the things that they do conflate, and he actually talks about this at length, is that they have taken the issue of the Holocaust, manipulated it, and I'm talking the Zionist movement specifically, because there are many Jewish allies that we have who speak to this issue. They have taken the issue of the Holocaust, manipulated it, cooked it up in a way where they have extended the Nazi genocidal intent that they saw unfold to the Palestinians, to an extent where they are painting the entire Palestinian population as Nazis. Hence, we need to defend ourselves to survive, otherwise we're going to have another Holocaust, right? So one of the fallacies that we see, and we're seeing this demonstrated, so when you see, we know that Israel has access to such high-tech, high-level precision or precise, weaponry and so forth. If they really wanted to get their target, they would. They wouldn't be carpet bombing Gaza as they have. But they have a deep-rooted, enshrined belief that all Palestinians are terrorists, that all Palestinians are bad, and they are the bad guy. And if we don't annihilate them and erase them off the face of this earth, hence genocide, ethnic cleansing, they're going to come back and kill us like they did to our forefathers. So we have to be very clear that a settler colony who has come and occupied your land, you cannot claim self-defense. It's ironic. You cannot claim, the two cannot go in the same sentence, right? An occupied peoples or nations has the right to resist because they are indigenous to the land. And again, sorry, just to throw a spanner in the works, something maybe, Nasser, if you can contribute to. How does an occupier claim a birthright to a land? So if I'm claiming I have a birthright to this particular land, why do I need to occupy it? Does that make sense? I've not seen it, and correct me if I'm wrong. Have you seen anywhere around the world where an indigenous peoples has had to go as far as to try to occupy a land with full self-determination, complete autonomy, complete freedom? I don't know, I'm throwing this.
No, you're right.
I've been thinking about this.
Land you need to bomb is not land you are indigenous to.
Absolutely.
Indigenous people don't bomb their land. There's no question about that. And as to, we know what Zionism is, yeah? So we have a look at the movement across the world, and we say in our thousands, in our millions, we're all Palestinian. And I know that if we were to do the sum total of 15 rallies across Sydney, Melbourne, all across, millions of people in Australia have come out, let alone 5 million in Yemen last week, let alone 400,000 in Washington, DC, in below zero temperatures, yeah? people don't say 400,000 people came out and it was minus 15 Celsius, something crazy like that, yeah? United Kingdom, Spain, Italy, and Germany, where, being Palestinian is criminalized, they're coming out. The uplift in the movement is because for 104 days, the world has been broadcast the first digital genocide. For 104 days, the world has not had a gatekeeper of Murdoch, not had the gatekeeper of Channel 9, not had the gatekeeper of whoever owns the media, Fox, Sky, whatever it might be. They've actually got their content live, digital genocide. And so the world has seen for 104 days what Palestinians have seen for 27,500 days. That Zionism, unchecked, is unadulterated racism. Now, unadulterated racism, when you add power to that, a nuclear-armed state, yeah? Submarines, ships, drones, all the sophistication, Apache helicopters, F-35s, absolute hate, all that power, and then you add the impunity the West gives. Israel's got a right to defend itself. Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East. All that stuff. And then you give it, beyond that impunity, then you give it the cover diplomatically at the United Nations and say, veto, veto, veto. What you then see, and the world gets to see, is what we've known for 27,600 days. That if you let this mentality go unchecked, they will wipe us out. And if you are silent now, you would have been silent at the Holocaust. You would have been silent at Srebrenica. You would have been silent at Rwanda. You would have been silent in Cambodia. You would have been silent 250 years ago when the genocide was perpetuated on our black brothers and sisters here. And so that has uplifted our movement. Now, our responsibility as leaders of the movement, our responsibility as Palestinian advocates is to harness that suffering in Gaza and to ensure that that blood has not been for naught. So that has to inform our advocacy. In the second instance, and very particular to your point, Ali, there is no question the foundation of Zionism is a lie like terra nullius here, that the land was empty. A land without people for a people without land. We didn't exist in a Zionist mindset. And the very earliest notions of Zionism talks about spiriting the penniless peasants away. Spiriting, help the penniless peasants away. They want all of the land with none of us. All of the geography with none of the demography. So Gaza, genocide, this is not, we saw when they took out Hezbollah guy in Sydney in an apartment building, they took out his bedroom with a guided munition. We saw the planned demolition of Gaza's last university. I mean, if you had enough time to go into that university and plant all the mines everywhere to do a controlled demolition, that university is no threat. Whatever threat existed there, if there's a threat, you do aerial bombardment, tanks. You don't go in there and put bombs on all the physical structures and columns to have it implode and then film it and broadcast it unless you believe absolutely in some sort of, your higher status of human being compared to whom you're killing. So if you take out all the civil infrastructure, you take out schools, the hospitals, the churches, the mosques, the art places, the infrastructure, you have made Gaza uninhabitable. And so the ethnic cleansing my father had at least had a little bit of dignity to it. And the dignity, whilst it was an ethnic cleanse, it was a bayonet, and if he chose to, he could have fought and he would have died. But there was some dignity to it. This ethnic cleanse is a grenade. The pin has been pulled and rolled into Gaza because Gaza is going to be uninhabitable for a decade. And uninhabitable, aside from the destruction of the infrastructure, there is no schools or houses or hospitals. People are going to have to live somewhere else. And if you are 48 refugee, I mean, many Gazans are actually from Gaza, but most people in Gaza came from 48, from Nablus, from Haifa, they came and they were thrown there. They've been dislocated, they've been bombed, they've been despised. Mown the lawn, Israel calls it mowing the lawn when they go into Israel for 17 years. Daily calorific intake required. We're killing your kids and everything, and nobody gave a stuff. And suddenly for the next 5 years, maybe 7 years, my kids are at Cairo Primary School. or perhaps, Randwick Primary School or Melbourne Primary School. And they go, good news, we've rebuilt Gaza. Who would go back? Who would go back?
I think what we're seeing happening, what we saw happening 2023 continuing, this is a personal opinion, not a scholar or anything, it is worse than the Nakba of 1948.
Yep.
And we know that the Nakba of 1948, which is the great catastrophe, which involved the massacre and exodus of many Palestinians, hundreds of thousands, it never ended, right? In Arabic, it's referred to as a Nakba al-Mustamirra, the ongoing Nakba. It never ended. There has always been a continuation of the Nakba, but we saw a climax of that. We're seeing a climax of that now in Gaza. But as Nasser was saying, what we have seen unfold now is worse than the Nakba of 1948. When my grandparents fled Jaffa in 1948, when they were forced, they locked their doors, took their keys on the assumption that they're going to one day go back, hence the notion of the right of return. They left this, land in a very privileged, not vulnerable state. My grandparents were wealthy, they were comfortable, they had, they were thriving, communities were very comfortable. Most actually report that they had such a hope that this was just temporary, right? It's a crisis that we're going to go back home to. That they left their jewelry, gold, Arabs and gold, right? And the investments that they make in gold in their walls on the assumption that they're going to go back one day. So there was an element of comfort, right? Gaza was an already vulnerable piece of land or strip. And as of 2020, the United Nations had actually deemed it uninhabitable. There's no clean water, there's no access to, adequate health care, and the list goes on. So you have an already vulnerable community or population. They are also refugees, by the way. Yes, there are many that are indigenous to Gaza, but most of Gaza is a refugee camp in and of itself. I've got family who fled from Jaffa and made their way in Gaza now, and they live in Khan Yunis because they couldn't go back. Hence the 2018 great marches that took place on the borders of Gaza for peaceful protests that took place, by the Palestinians as a mark, as a stance to show that we have a right to return. They were shot cold blank, right? Protesting peacefully. Imagine we're going to protest every week here in Sydney, only to be met by shoot to kill orders. And remember, the lovely young aspiring nurse Razan Najjar, who was shot point blank simply for showing up. Why? Because she was fighting for her right to return. So what we're seeing unfold, this is why it sickens us and it makes us feel so disgusted by what is happening, the level of impunity and lack of accountability and so forth that we are seeing. Because yes, it is a live digital genocide that we are witnessing, and everyone's just watching and scrolling through. And we're the lucky ones because we still have access to social media. Sorry, but if you are not invested in the cause, you have no idea as to what's going on. If you go to your, whatever suburb and speak to your average John or Jenny, they may have no idea as to what's going on because they're not going to get it from Channel 9, 7 or Sky News and so forth. Also in the Middle East, I just got back from Umrah, and depending on who you're talking to in Saudi, there's a huge censorship in media, by the way, in our Muslim countries. So depending on who you're talking to, what access you have to social media, and this is the thing that we've taught mainstream media, is that we don't need you to tell our stories. We've got social media, it's a powerhouse. The Arab Spring took place through social media. Hence, there is a lot of power in that. We can't give up on social media. We have to keep sharing the stories. For those who are getting shadow banned inside of Gaza, we need to amplify and lift their stories. But why this is very frustrating is because we are watching a genocide, another Nakba event, by tenfold worse than that of 1948. And the global community is just waiting to consider very carefully, should we even call for a ceasefire? Should we? It's maybe a pause, right? So it's a very frustrating situation.
Can I just say something very quickly there, and I didn't finish earlier on, that Gaza is actually the model for the West Bank. This is passing now silently, nobody's stopping it, and they're going to complete their mission, and they'll look for the trigger in the West Bank.
Yeah, actually, that was the point that that I wanted to make as well, that Gaza's cry is a cry of the whole of Palestine. The policies that are placed against the Palestinian people is racist wherever you go, whether it's in the West Bank or Jerusalem or in Gaza. So to just give you a contextual kind of picture, is that Palestine is divided into pieces of land where supposedly Palestinians have control in where they live, but the Israeli occupation have control of every part of the land. So you've got the West Bank, you've got Jerusalem, and then in Jerusalem it's also divided, and you've got Gaza as well. And then you've got the 1948 lands, Haifa, Yafa. I want to take this opportunity to place some highlight on what our families in the West Bank are going through and what our families in Jerusalem are going through. Since the 7th of October, more than 6,000 Palestinians have been arrested, if we want to say, or taken as hostages in illegal Israeli prisons. Since the 7th of October, Palestinians are not allowed to pray freely or enter Masjid al-Aqsa. Isn't that also against international law? Isn't that also against the right to live freely? Just 2 days ago, a family member living in Tulkarm in West Bank, he was arrested. 7 a.m., the Israeli occupying forces rocked up to the house, broke everything into the house, took a 20-year-old young man for no reason. So I want to say that, yes, everyone in Palestine is bleeding. And when we say free Palestine or free Gaza, we say free to all of the Palestinians, even the Palestinians اللي عايشين or that are living in the 1948 lands. The policies that are placed on the Palestinians that live in 1948, they can't even post or reshare. But can't we ask ourselves, how important is that? If we're saying that our voice is what we use to stand with our people, what about if our voice is taken? Isn't that a sense of dehumanization? Isn't that also a sense of feeling where you feel you're held by the neck? So everyone in Palestine has their own story with the occupation. Everyone in Palestine experiences dehumanization. Yes, Gaza, what's happening in Gaza? Now, I'm in my 20s, I don't know what happened in the Nakba. The only thing I know is through the books and stories. But from my parents and grandparents, yes, they say the level in which the Israeli occupation has reached is far beyond what they've used, far beyond.
Ramia, you raised the point earlier about controlled censorship of media and whatnot in Arab countries, Saudi, for example. The question that a lot of people seem to have is, why aren't the neighboring Arab countries, Muslim countries, or Arab countries in general, they haven't exactly done much about this, have they? What's the reason for that? There's so much advocacy and support around the world, us in a Western country, all that type of stuff. Why haven't the Muslim countries, Arab countries in particular, really done anything material to move the needle?
I'll quickly answer and then I'll move it. Treachery and betrayals are nothing new in our history. If we're talking specifically Muslim countries as well, it's nothing new. It's been around for a very long time. If we're to unpack it from the time of the Prophet ﷺ up until the Ottoman Empire. Who here's watched Ertugrul, by the way? Resurrection. You must watch it. It is an amazing series, very long series, Turkish series. But it at least gives you an idea as to the extent of treachery from those who are closest to you. Muslims. They're Muslims with agendas, with ideas exactly like you, but they have their own personal agendas, and it's indifferent. So what we are seeing happen around the world from our fellow Muslim countries, especially Emirates, which, I believe is an extension of Zionism now, probably be prohibited from stepping into Emirates now. What we're seeing unfold there is just beyond comprehension, truly. But it's nothing new. It isn't meant to, however, deter us from doing the work that we're doing here. And this is one of the things that yes, there is frustration out there in terms of feeling this anti-Palestinian sentiment, Islamophobia and so forth. However, for the time being, we have something called freedom of speech, freedom of opinion. I am just as Australian. This is a statement that I'm pushing along. I was born and raised here, and I am just as Australian as any other Australian, whether you were born here or not. And don't make me feel otherwise. And we need to be proud of our Australianism, and it's very important, particularly for our young ones, because we have this issue with identity and struggle and where do we belong and so forth. You're definitely not going to belong in the countries abroad or your homelands. You're not. You're going to go there and feel like strangers, and as you do here. But we really need to instill this point in that I'm just as Australian as you are. And someone shared this line very often in that, Australia only has two stories. It's either the migrant story or the Indigenous story. You can't be Australian any other way. You are either Indigenous to the land or you came as a migrant. That's it. So I consider myself Australian. I will utilise, capitalise, take opportunity for every possible means to allow me to further this particular cause. Can I do it in the Middle East? Probably not. Just as for your information, just came back from Umrah. I was in the most sacred of mosques in Medina, which is Masjid al-Nabawi, the mosque of our beloved Prophet, peace be upon him. Last year, I was there. I went last year. I was walking. There was no issues like we are seeing happening now in Gaza last year, but I always would wear my kufiya anyway. No one would say a thing. In fact, I pulled my kufiya out in front of the Kaaba one day last year, and I took a photo. It's on my profile pic on my Facebook page. Nobody said anything. This year, however, I walk into Masjid al-Nabawi in Medina with my kufiya. Twice I was pulled aside. I was told once, we're just giving you a heads up that we don't like anything political inside the mosque. And I said, hold on, look around you. Every single nation here, for fear of getting lost, your old, Lebanese ladies, Turkish ladies, they all have their flags on their hijabs, and because they're stuck to their groups. Everyone's wearing their flags. Uzbekistan, Indonesia, Malaysia. Why is this deemed political? They said, look, we're just warning you. That was one. The second time, I got actually pulled up by two undercover niqabi police inside the mosque. And I was specifically told to remove my kufiya. And I was told, because there are cameras here, we're giving you a chance to avoid having been pulled up, interrogated unnecessarily, and so forth. This is in Saudi, in the most blessed of mosques, the mosque of the Prophet, peace be upon him, who was, in fact, time and time again, betrayed by the very people that we are talking about in this conversation, right? Time and time again. So do I lose all hope? Absolutely not. Am I going to change the world there? No, but I don't give up hope here. I continue the work that I do. Treachery and betrayals is nothing new. We're seeing it surface, but go back to our history, go back and read the seerah. In fact, right now is one of the most, and I'm sorry, I know it's a diverse audience, but I address my Muslim brethren here. This is the time to tap back into the seerah and the biography of the Prophet ﷺ. Very important. And if you haven't read these two texts, When the Moon Split and The Sealed Nectar, tap back into these texts. They're very important because they talk about the characteristics of these people, right? And the treachery and the betrayals and the extent of hate that they had towards even Muslims. This is the time to reflect, and then we need to then channel all these tools, because Islamophobia is not new, by the way. Islamophobia was around at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, 1400 years ago. The tools are the same. How we deal with it is exactly the same. So we need to realign ourselves with our seerah, with our teachings, and extract the tools in order to allow us to deal with these issues better, inshallah. Nasir, I'm sure you have more political...
I could listen, Ramya, I can listen to you all day. I can listen to you all day, and you know, and it's beautiful to hear you say that. And I think what we, you know, to extrapolate on the betrayal, yeah. If you have a look at the borders, all the colonial borders, yeah, and the colonial borders aren't just the colonial borders here. If you have look at Northern Territory's borders, yeah, Western Australia's borders, they're all straight lines. Borders in Europe, India and China is the mountain range. It's a river. Then have a look at what they did to Africa. Look at the borders of Africa. You know, Egypt and Libya, they're dead straight lines because white people went, that's your bit, that's your bit. Look at the Middle East, all the lines are straight. So what empire does is it says, good news, Nasser, we're going to make you the king. Now, if you tell Nasser you're going to make him the king, you're going to make him pretty happy. But generally, Nasser is going to be from a minority or from a smaller family. And so as an empirist, I'll say to maybe the House of Saud, I'm going to give you a kingdom. You know, Arabia, Saud Arabia, the House of Saud, I'm going to make you, and go, so good luck with your kingdom. Now, if you're the House of Saud, maybe you go, listen, you know, we're a small family. Great that you made me the king, I'm pretty excited about that, but where are you going? If you leave, I'm not sure I'll be able to keep this kingdom. And so have a look at how the Arab world was split up, how, and the religious connotations and how those lines happened, where suddenly, and also in Africa, many of the issues in Africa with respect to this, suddenly brothers became different countries. You know, countrymen were different citizens of different places, and then the division was sowed, and then empire said, we'll elevate you and we'll protect you, we'll keep an army here. And so the protection of these fake countries is predicated on the power they receive from them, but also being a pawn in the Western imperial control of the Middle East and the resources that sit there. But then there are opportunities for the world to see Palestine, yeah, and to see what the street thinks of Palestine. And it might be a soccer game in Algeria. It might be the World Cup in Qatar. It might be a soccer guy kicking a goal and doing a dance and emulating an indigenous dance from Turtle Island from North America that a Gazan was doing amongst the tear gas and the smoke of the annihilation of Gaza. And there's a connectedness for all of those people. And it could have been Qatar versus Morocco, Morocco versus Algeria. There were more Palestinian flags there than there were of any other countries. And it's because the people are not the country. When Asala was talking about a right to exist, Israel doesn't have a right to exist. Countries don't have rights to exist. Humans have rights. Humans have rights. And unfortunately, the world over, we have been ruled by people who are interested more in power than in humanity. And that expresses itself, sadly, as violence. So we have been portrayed as Palestinians and used as political footballs for advantage, and whether it was Saddam Hussein invading Kuwait and saying, when the Israelis get out of the West Bank, I'll get out of Kuwait, like we needed that. Yeah? And that's just one example of a political leader using Palestine as an example. They've all done it. And King Faisal in 1973 in the Yom Kippur War turned the petrol off. He said, until this war stops, there will be no petrol. And they said, you know, you won't have any money. And he said to them, you know, we're desert people. We can live on goat's milk and we can live in the desert. You're the ones that need petrol. And amazingly, a year later, he was assassinated by his nephew or something. But anyway, we've been betrayed and they will continue to betray us. Our power is in our people, in our righteousness, in our belief and fundamental humanity, and in our faith. And if we interlock all of those things with other like-minded people, we're undefeatable.
Yeah, I want to get three of your opinions on this. At the start of the conflict, Israel blamed Egypt for not opening up the Rafah border to let the Palestinians in. Would you say that Egypt also has blood on their hands for what they've done?
Can I just also comment on that in regards to Egypt and the Middle Eastern countries? Now, we know that the governments don't represent the people, just the way in this country The government does not represent us. In saying that, on the other hand, when we're speaking about government, we're thinking of the macro kind of world, you know, it's the government. But who's behind the government? It's people. It's individuals who are making the decisions. Now, I'm not a political expert here. I'm not a politician. But being a Palestinian and raised in a Palestinian household, the only thing that you hear is politics. Now, when you look at the Middle East, you are looking at politicians or leaders that have been placed for a reason. Israel has its ties with the United States. Back in the days, it used to be under the table. Now everything is as clear as the sky. Now, the United States and Israeli occupation have played a huge role on who are the governors of the countries. If we're talking about Jordan, now King Abdullah is not supposed to be the king. There was a change in the constitution, and that's why he's the king. You know, part of the Jordanian constitution was that your father and mother should be Jordanian, okay? But his mother's not Jordanian. And if we're speaking about a country that's responsible, yes, Jordan's responsible in standing with the Palestinian people. Egypt is responsible with standing with the Palestinian people. Why hasn't Sisi until now opened the borders? You know, why? There are people that want to leave Gaza, just the way there's people that want to stay in Gaza. There are people that have made the decision to send their children to seek protection, and they want to stay back in Gaza. In regards to Muslim countries, if we want to speak about Muslim countries, now the Middle East is very diverse. It's not just Muslims, and that's what's so beautiful about it. But if we want to speak about Saudi or Egypt, now Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that the Muslim ummah is like one body. When part of that body is in pain, the other part feels the pain. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that judges, but a Muslim is also shown through actions. And if we want to speak about Saudi or Egypt, are your actions in reflection of Islam? Islam is defined by actions, and you can't basically judge a country based on the governments. But you can also see a country based on the population and the governments. Looking at Yemen, as we say, Yemen, Yemen, make us proud, turn another ship around. We've gotten to a point where it's not about negotiations. We're over that. Khalas, kifaya. People are being killed every second. It's not about talk. It's about action. Yemen has shown us action. And there are other specific countries as well. Has Egypt shown us action? I'm in question of that. So, governors are humans, they have souls, and there's a God. And if they will not be accountable in this world, they will be accountable on the Day of Judgment. And that's what gives the Palestinians faith, that the death isn't the ending, that's not the ending for us. There's something after that. And that's the power of faith. That these governors, I actually don't know how they put their heads on that pillow. But you know what? There's fear. And as humans, it's natural to feel fear. Maybe amongst us, there's people that have experienced fear to speak up in their jobs. But like I said, Rabbil Alameen al-Birzaq. God is the one that gives, and God is the one that is merciful, you know? But there's accountability. If this accountability is not met in this world, it will be met on the Day of Judgment, inshallah.
Very well said. A question on the topic of governments and politics and everything else. oftentimes people aren't really aware or very clear about what is the government of Palestine. Like you look, for example, when Ukraine was invaded, you had the face of it, Zelensky, who was the human face of it, went around to the global politicians, who went around to prime ministers and presidents and rallied the troops and lobbied for his people, etc., etc. We don't see a face of Palestine per se. We see the people of Palestine. We see that. But from a political perspective, this is all about lobbying. Nasser knows this more than most of us do. It's about the backroom discussions, behind the scenes, all those sorts of things. What does that look like? Would you shed some light on the political situation?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the, as heroic and uplifting and courageous as the Gazan people is, as staunch and powerful their resistance is in living, and you see it in their sabr, and you see it in their determination. As beautiful as that is, the absolute opposite can be said of our quote-unquote leaders. They are everything that is despicable about human beings when put in a situation of survival, of a pressure cooker, and it becomes, a rat race in the very absolute vilest connotations of that rat race. They eat each other. And so our leaders do not lead, rather it is a pursuit of personal prestige, personal money, personal satisfaction at the expense of the people. So the Palestinians, quote unquote, are governed by a sycophantic, complicit authority called the Palestinian Authority, led by Mahmoud Abbas in the administrative, quote unquote, capital of Palestine in Ramallah. A disgusting entity that has betrayed its people time and time again, betrayed them and the justness of their struggle. Father, we do not have a legitimate Palestinian leadership. In 2005, there were elections, democratic elections. Jimmy Carter, the former President of the United States, and the Carter Peace Center, he oversaw the elections in Gaza and East Palestine, the West Bank, and said they were the freest and fairest elections he'd ever seen. And Hamas won. Now, this was the first experience of real democracy in the entire Arab world. And we were never allowed to enjoy that experience for 1 minute. The day after, Israel and the United States issued a dictate that unless Hamas would sign on to everything the PA had already signed away, that complicity, unless they signed on to that betrayal, they would not be allowed to govern. And Hamas, to their credit, said they wouldn't. Now, I want to be very clear. Hamas's political agenda today, they accept a two-state solution. Hamas is unacceptable to me. Not for any other reason, but they are now choosing political advantage and power and opportunity at the expense of all of our people. Asala spoke about the experience of our brothers and sisters in 48 in Jerusalem, but also the Palestinians that are in diaspora. Hamas cannot speak for my unborn grandchildren if they can go back to Haifa, Akka, Nablus. They cannot speak for them. Hamas is today a two-state operation. They believe in the two-state solution. So in occupations, and the Germans did it in the French when they occupied France, they installed what was called the Vichy government, which came out of Vichy, France. And we have a Vichy Palestinian Authority who are our quote-unquote leaders who are not worth the soul of anyone in his shoe.
Asala, a question for you. How do we, as people who aren't obviously directly, physically impacted by what's happening in Gaza and Palestine, how do we deal with the survivor's guilt? Because it's something that everyone's battling from within. Yeah. There are people who we're seeing who are part of the Muslim community who are putting off weddings and celebrations because they don't want to be seen to be celebrating at a time of adversity. There are even people who aren't Muslim, who are not celebrating Christmas or birthdays. We've seen that, and it's an outpouring of love and support from the global, population. But coping with that survivor's guilt, how do we work that, particularly amongst children?
Yeah.
You can see young kids going to school, they come home, they turn on the TV, they see the news, and they're like, these are my people. And I'm meant to be going out there and kicking a ball and having a party and living my life. How do we deal with all this?
Is that in regards to myself?
Overall.
Okay. Something that's been really hitting me really hard emotionally is fearing not to be able to go back home. Now, I was born in Bethlehem and I migrated to Australia at the age of 4. But that wasn't the end of my connection to my homeland. I'm going to give a bit of context because guilt doesn't come from nowhere. There's external influences that bring around or bring about feelings. If I'm speaking about myself and the journey of emotions and feelings, I have to acknowledge my connection with my homeland. I was born in Palestine. My story with my connection to my homeland didn't just start when I was woken by the harsh reality of the occupation. My journey in growing up in Australia and finding every opportunity to go back home built that connection. And yes, you don't have to be Palestinian to feel the pain. You don't have to be a Muslim to feel the pain. The Palestinian cause isn't just for Muslims. The Palestinian cause isn't for Palestinians. And that's what's been so important about the movement, that it's touched everyone's heart, thousands and millions around the world. But if I was speaking about myself, my connection to my homeland is like a child who's connected to her mother. It's like a child who waits and waits just to return to her mother. And that yearn to be back home kills. And you realize that it's something beyond the heart. It's the mind, the body, and the soul. And as Muslims, we believe there's beyond the body. There's the connection between the mind, the body, and the soul. And when I'm in Palestine, I feel every part of my existence is felt and served. My mind, my body, and the soul. So if I have that yearn, and I'm living miles away from my home, and I still have a shelter, I still have my parents around me, I still have my loved ones, but I'm watching a genocide and comprehending that there's another Nakba happening in front of my eyes is very heavy. Because a few years ago, on every year commemorating the Nakba, you'll be like, okay, 1948, 750,000 Palestinians have been displaced. But then now, I'm in my 20s, and I'm watching a genocide happening on the phone. Yes, it's going to bring about feelings of guilt, sometimes helplessness, sometimes fear as well. We're human. But then I remind myself that to feel is to be a human. It is the heart that sees, it's not the eyes. So I am grateful that I may experience the feeling of guilt. I'm grateful that I may experience the feeling of helplessness. It's because I care. It's because we care. The difference between us and them is that they don't feel. They actually don't feel another one's suffering. And I do not envy them on that. I don't. But I'm grateful that I feel that guilt. But it's about, what do I do with that guilt? It's about how do I channel that guilt? Am I going to sit at home? La wallah, because that's not how we were raised. Am I going to just sit helpless? La wallah, because that's not how we were raised. We were raised to stand up, strong and firm, and to use the last beacon of strength and hope to fight and resist the occupation. And I say resist. And I say resist because resistance comes in many shapes and forms. For me, for an older aunt to be waiting for her son who hasn't seen him for more than 30 years, Hejaz Mazyuna, who I don't relate to by blood, but I feel she relates to me in my heart. Hejaz Mazyuna is an older aunt that I met in Bethlehem in 2018 when I went back home. My grandmother, who I've never seen, who harvested the land, my grandfather, who lived on the land, who raised his kids on the land, that's what I go back to give me the strength. I go back to the fathers and the journalists in Gaza to regulate the emotion of guilt and to remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put us in this world for a reason. مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا. And I remind myself with that. If Allah gave me something, I'm not going to undermine that. And I've had my own, I just want to take this opportunity. That Allah places you in this world for a reason. And I have had my own journey in understanding what my reason is. Understanding my faith and the importance of Palestine in my life is what allows me to manage the feeling of guilt. Allah gave me a voice, and I've had my journey with my voice. I've experienced the stutter, I've went into therapy, and I've had people that have put me down. I have people that had looked down at me because of my Palestinian identity. I had people that told me, don't wear that kufiya. But if there's one thing that told me how to be, it is the connection between my faith and my Palestinian identity.
Can I just add just a few comments to this? I think guilt's very important, but again, there's a fine line, and I think we all need to feel the guilt because it puts us back on track. And I think, guilt. I'm not Asala's the mental health expert. I'm a lawyer, so I'm completely in another world. But it's a disgusting feeling, right? Guilt is actually meant to sort of illuminate a bit of an uncomfortable feeling, and that's good to a certain extent, to a non-debilitating, non-paralyzing extent. And how do you avoid reaching that? How do you avoid the burnout? How do you avoid potentially losing the momentum? We were talking about this earlier today. The fear, the greatest fear I have is not the guilt so much, it's what's going to happen when the Palestine trend dies down, because it always dies down, right? You need to be advocating for Palestine 365 days a year, not just when the bombs hit Gaza. And I think one of the most important things, and I'm going to talk quickly from a faith-based perspective, and this is across the board, whether you're Muslim, Christian, or whatever faith you have, whatever, I guess, feeds and nourishes the soul is something you need to tap into. When we go back again to the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, he was a holistic being. Everything he approached, again, nothing we're experiencing today is new. He's experienced it all. Boycotts, massacres, battles, loss of life, loss of wealth, every test that you could possibly think of. Whether you go through it personally or what we are seeing unfolding in Gaza, the Prophet ﷺ went through it. He was a human being that bled and breathed exactly like us. Allah sent him as a practical means for us to be able to resonate with. Allah did not send an angel to practically implement the Quran. He sent a human being. When we look at the Prophet ﷺ, he was a holistic being. He bled, he cried, he was spiritual. He was very spiritual, but he was also very political. So for those of us who are trying to box ourselves up into, I'm just going to sit and make dua all day, and that's it. That's not going to work. Dua is not going to work. You need to be out there. You need to be doing the practical parts of it all. You need to be advocating, lobbying, using whatever skill set you have to further the cause. If rallying is one, make sure you're at every rally. If, wearing a kufiya to your workplace is one, that's your advocacy. If meeting with parliamentarians and agitating them, like Nasser does, then that's your skill set. And the list goes on. Everyone has a skill set. And the Prophet ﷺ was able to identify that, but he was also spiritual. And this is the time to now combine the two. So when we go through those moments of guilt, we need to, I guess, this notion of muhasabah, muraqabah, self-interrogation, self-observation, sit with ourselves for a moment, try to ask ourselves, okay, what is my contribution to all this? Why has Allah put me here with my abilities, my skill set, the time that I have, potentially the wealth that I have? What can I do with them? Because they're the things. This is, by the way, the test that we are going through here is a much harder test than the Palestinians are going through, by the way. I'm telling you. The test they're going through is horrific. It is blatant difficulty, loss of life, loss of wealth, no access to food, starvation, fear, this notion of not having safety, in our system is so important. Having safety is so important. They don't have any of that. But they have been, they have absolutely nothing. They've been stripped of everything to an extent that they know the world has turned its back on them except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are living in times of absolute ease. We have everything accessible to us. Time, money, wealth, skill sets, safety, comfort, right? And they're the things that trigger and prompt that guilt. So you need to ask yourself when you are going through those moments of guilt, okay, I feel bad. What can I do to channel what I have into something for the cause? Whatever that looks like. Do not underestimate at all the contribution that you make. And it can be as simple, wallahi, and I'll give you again, going back to the kufiya example in Saudi when I was doing Umrah, why it was so important for me to wear that kufiya, even as simple as wearing a little Palestinian pin on your coat. I was asked by so many when I was there, from all walks of life in Saudi, are you Palestinian? Yes. May Allah grant them victory. We are here for you. You prompted an opportunity for dua. If not, you prompt an opportunity for solidarity. You prompt an opportunity for conversation, for education. So when you are going through these moments of guilt, don't let it debilitate you. And this is why being around community is very important, by the way. In moments of crisis, the last thing you should do is isolate yourself. You have to be around your people to be able to re-energize and to be able to regain that strength and that momentum, and then tap into the avenues in which that will make change. Just very quickly, I'm going to do something very naughty, but if every one of you here, I know there's, alhamdulillah, it's a lovely audience. Who has Instagram here? I mean, other than obviously following Hejaz and out of interest and all that, I want you to follow two very important, because this is part of advocacy. I need you to follow APAN, the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network pages, and BDS in Australia. Really, really important that you follow these two pages. And I want you, honestly, to promise me that when you do go home, go as far as not only to follow these pages, but especially with APAN, sign up as members. We need to build movements on the ground, and we can only do it through your help. So when you're going through moments of guilt, and what can I do? What's the point? I don't feel like my contribution's meaning anything. You have direction somewhere. You have somewhere to guide you as to what your contribution could look like, inshallah.
Can I also just, something from a mental health perspective, and emotional regulation is important. Just like people may go to the gym to build their physical strength, young kids may study to build their academic intelligence, emotional intelligence is key as well. And when we're speaking about guilt, and one way to deal with guilt is to acknowledge that you're feeling guilty, and to be asking yourself, what am I feeling? Because you cannot regulate your emotion without acknowledging your feeling. And I'm saying this to females and men as well. Men feel, men have emotions, just the way females have emotions. And we'll look at Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how he dealt with his feelings as well. So in order to regulate the feeling of guilt or any other feeling, it's to acknowledge and to ask yourself, what am I feeling and what can I do with that feeling? And just one more thing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is greater than any emotion as well. Allah puts emotions for a reason. It's about what meaning you can make from the emotions that you experience.
On the topic of what can I do, oftentimes we get asked by people within our community and people more broadly as well about the fact that donating into Palestinian endeavors or whatever it is, there are two things, and I want you all to sort of clarify this for all of us. Number one, if somebody donates to a Palestinian cause and somehow funds are tracked to various parties over there, whatever it is, we trigger anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism, et cetera, So therefore, there's a certain trepidation that some people feel about, okay, well, should I be donating? And secondly, will my money actually end up getting there?
I think,
so,
yeah.
That was one thing. And on the topic of money and things, there's also the notion of, and also you've done a lot of work in this regard as well, about building awareness around people's investments, where their money goes, what they invest in, because that invariably funds all that. So on the topic of money, can we shed some light on that as well?
So I think that there's two parts of that. It's a really good segue. Number one, part of Zionism, part of that white racist ideology is criminalizing Palestine. Yep, it's criminalizing Palestine. It's criminalizing Palestine by universities adopting the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism that Ramya was speaking about, that makes you an anti-Semite if you call Israel a racist endeavor. Israel is a racist endeavor. Let's be very clear about that. That is anti-Semitic. I absolutely believe that Israel is a racist endeavor. But it's anti-Semitic under the IHRA, and if it was to become law, there would be repercussions. What Israel has done purposefully, led by the Likudniks and the Benjamin Netanyahus, is to conflate Israel with Jews. That Israel is Jews and Jews is Israel. They are not the same. The Jewish religion is an Abrahamic religion. We say they're the children, our cousins, the children of a book. And Judaism is beautiful. Our prophets are their prophets. Their prophets are our prophets. That is not Zionism, and it is not the State of Israel. So the criminalization of Palestine is part of the organization, the orchestration of subduing our resistance. And we talk about our resistance. It is not just physical. Our resistance, in a way for us to assuage our guilt as best we can, is to live, is to thrive. That is resistance. To get married, to have children, to raise our children, to remember their heritage. That is resistance in and of itself. So when the criminalization of Palestine, the criminalization of aid to Palestine, the Orwellian fear of, if I give money and it ends up, will I be a terrorist? I can't, part of the attack job on me, I found out that our charity, Olive Kids, gave some money to a nurses union that somehow is linked to something that maybe somebody said. The people accusing us are NGO Monitor, which, is an extension of Zionism, which, I've already told you is just disgusting racism. So I'm not worried at all about that accusation, and we're looking forward to our opportunity to see them in court. But it creates a fear, yeah? So there are reputable ways to do things, and I'm sure we'll be able to direct people to use AusAid and organisations that the Australian government has okayed to do. So there is no reason why people shouldn't be donating. Absolutely. It's a tenet of our religion to donate. And Gaza needs you now more than ever to donate. So dig deep when you're watching this podcast, however else they might be, and particularly bidding at the painting I've been watching unfold in front of us. But it's also important for us to advocate And so Ramya touched on before joining APAN, the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network, but joining your local organisations. And in the spirit of money, BDS Australia, Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions Australia, Ramya spoke about it again earlier on their website, we're running a superannuation campaign. The overwhelming majority of superannuation funds, based on our research, are complicit in some way in funding the genocide and the oppression of Palestinians. So we are running a campaign there. It's a very important campaign. So if you go to, or just Google BDS and super, or hopefully you can put the hyperlink in this point in the podcast, and click on the link in the podcast, and it will take you to our superannuation campaign. You need to send an email to your superannuation and demand to know if your retirement funds are complicit in the oppression of Palestinians. Sign that, we'll get your email, and we'll let you know what to do second.
Can I build on the legal standpoint on that? Because I have been seeing it through my line of work a lot. Is there a fear in donating? Yes, absolutely. But you have a responsibility to ensure that you are donating to credible, reputable organisations. The rest is not in your hands, right? So if it's, your mum's WhatsApp messages that are going around, deposit into my bank account, I'd be very weary, honestly. I'd be very weary, and we are seeing flags of bank accounts, bank closures, you name it. And this is irreversible. If you want more information, come see me after. These are big issues. One of my greatest fears, and I do work with the Gaza Children's Fund, which is also a not-for-profit. One of my greatest fears over the last few decades, or decade or so, in all of these issues is that the blockade would also extend to financial aid, right? So we understand there's an air, land and sea blockade, but my greatest fear has always been, what if they extend that to financial aid? And we are seeing that unfold. There have been conversations through the Attorney General's Department and so forth to potentially put a curb on certain channeling of funds into specifically Gaza, because there may be a fear that it is funding Hamas or a terrorist organisation and so forth. Conversation that's put to the side. But your responsibility as a donor is to make sure the organisation you're donating to is registered, it is credible, it is registered with, ACNC, has a charity licence and so forth. The rest is not on you. In terms of, because we do get a lot of questions, is the money getting there, is it not, whatever. Yes, money is getting there. Yes, there are depleted supplies there. We are having major issues in distributing goods and services and whatnot, but it doesn't stop you from donating, because we want to be on standby when it comes to the rebuilding phase. We don't want to sit there and raise funds when it comes to rebuilding for Gaza. We want to be ready. But I want now us as a community, as a potentially grassroots movement, beginners, to start thinking outside of the box. Our community has evolved. I think we're wealthy, alhamdulillah, as a community. Not personally, as a community. We do have money, right? We need to start thinking outside the box. Keep supporting humanitarian aid and charities, but these are band-aid solutions. Meaning, we need to address the issue at its core. We need to start investing and directing our charities to organisations that are doing the work for us. And again, not because I have affiliations with APAN and the likes, but any organisation that's doing work like APAN, right? We need to start supporting, because whether you like it or not, we know through the Zionist lobby how powerful they are. Why? Why are they powerful? Because they're not working with volunteers. Honestly, they're not working with volunteers. They are working with paid staff who are able to further their agenda and their cause. So whether we like it or not, we need to start thinking outside the box and supporting organisations, financially supporting organisations that are doing tremendous work in addressing the issue at its core and not merely through band-aid solutions. Inshallah.
Before we wrap things up, because I'm seeing Matteo finishing up, right?
It's amazing.
Looks incredible, I'm not going to lie. I might buy that for myself. But I am going to ask you guys one thing. What's the Israeli Prime Minister's name? Benjamin
Netanyahu.
That one. If he was here right now, what message would you guys have?
Netanyahu?
Benjamin Netanyahu. What?
Benjamin Netanyahu.
Netan.
That one. I don't know how to pronounce his surname. I don't know why. If he was here right now, what message would you give him, Nasir?
Now we should start with Asala because I might have to calm things down. We should.
Would he even be allowed inside Aslan?
Let's say that camera is Benjamin Nutmeg. What would you say?
What a question.
Let's end it on a high.
You know, like I always think about facing the enemy. Number one, I would make sure that I would have learnt Hebrew
Okay.
before, and I had made that commitment to myself actually after a very traumatic experience with the occupation, that I will learn Hebrew. I haven't done that yet, but inshallah one day. You know, I guess, I actually don't know. For the first time, Asala doesn't have an answer. But if I was to give an answer, I'll keep him for the fighters in Palestine. Khalas. I'll keep him for them.
Yeah. Ramya?
I would say to him that the justice of this world will never be able to measure and give you the punishment that you are so deserved of, truly. No matter how much justice we pursue, and not to say that we shouldn't pursue it, you absolutely, and look, as a lawyer, again, I tell you, pursue justice, but don't expect ever to go back into the same spot that you expect. So I'll tell him, the justice of this world is never going to be able to put you in the place and position that you are deserving on. And I remind you of Fir'aun and his ultimate punishment. And I pray that I am there on the day of judgment, watching you walk into the lowest pits of the fire of hell, while those you oppressed in this dunya, to the extent that you have, rejoice at that punishment. Because I don't think there is any justice in this world to be given back to this tyrant and the Fir'aun of today.
There is actually no better answer than that. And so I will tell you the actual answer if you see Benjamin Netanyahu, and that is to turn your back on him, because he and his ilk do not see us as human, and they don't deserve our time. So just walk out.
Safe approach.
And I say this from the perspective, and to each of you here and anybody that might be watching, there is nothing to be gained by debating a Zionist.
100%.
Zero.
100%.
There's no space.
That's why we keep him
There's
for the
100
fighters in Palestine.
There's 100 people, if you want to have a look at it from a movement perspective and what we're trying to do as organisers and advocates and trying to build, because Australia is movable, yeah? You have a look at where we were in sort of late October, early November, compared to the rest of the world, Australia was advanced. Look at the conversations we're having now, the nuance in Penny Wong's language. I mean, she still went and did all the stuff, but she didn't go to the south. Yeah? She met with victims of settler violence. Australia is movable. Australia is a middle power, and it's movable because of us. Yeah, it's movable when you think about the attacks on us and all of the media hype, directed at me because I was like, some evil merchant. It was because, as an organisation, as capable as the organisation is, and the uplifting of people. And positioning of those like Asala and Ramya and so many of our other magnificent Palestinian people, we were moving and advancing the Palestinian agenda, and we have moved it further here in this Western country than almost any other Western country. And we're going to get a really good opportunity in the future. But coming back to the movement, there's 100 people, and 20 people out of 100 are with us. Not just with us here, they're with us on the rallies, they're with us in petitions, they're with us, 20 and 100. less than 10 are with them. Less than 10 are with them. Our job is to talk to number 79, yeah? You know, the three of us are number 100. Each of you are 99s, you know, maybe even 100s, maybe 101s. Actually, Asala's the 101. The rest of us are 100. Our job is to get to number 79, and number 79 is easy, yeah? Number 79 is our very good friend at work who's whitey, who said, "How are you feeling, Nasser?" Our movement's job is to get to number 49. There's no point talking to number 11. Our job is to get to number 49. So if you see Benjamin Netanyahu, there is no point talking to him because number 1. No point talking to number 11, let alone number 1. Our job is to get to number 49 as a movement. And that also extrapolates itself, please, in your social media. If somebody slides into your DMs and they are a Zionist, a block, a block, a block.
On that note,
Can I just say that now internally in the illegal state of Israel, there's kind of a push against Netanyahu, okay? So internally, the politics and the government in Israel is crumbling as well. But I just want to say, if Netanyahu is gone, that doesn't end the problem. The problem is the Zionist movement, okay? So even if Netanyahu is gone, someone worse than him will come. So the problem is not just Netanyahu. You know, the problem is the Zionists around the world.
Systematic.
It's that systematic racism that you face as a Palestinian, whether that you live under occupation in Palestine or you live in the diaspora. So in saying that, I just want to say, like what you said, Ramia, it's that fear of the trend. Palestine is not a trend. Even though Palestine is more than 14,000 miles away from where we are, it's people waking up and sleeping to this reality. So the commitment that we need from everyone, from myself or from anyone in this world, it's a long-term commitment. So I want everyone as well, this is a reminder to myself, to be reflecting, are you ready for this long-term commitment? Liberation is near, inshallah, and we believe in it, and we've been promised. But please be committed to this cause, inshallah.
And it should be, and what Asala's talking about, and I know I've heard her say it so many times, you know, the liberation of Palestine exists, and why it is an exemplar for movements all over the world is because colonization didn't work there. Colonization, when it works, looks like this, where 100% of the population in 1750 was indigenous. And today, 250 years later, they're 2% of the population. Yeah. Colonization didn't work in Palestine because we're 52%. And we are the exemplar for the Uyghurs, the Rohingya, indigenous brothers and sisters here, our Samoans, our Maoris, everyone on Turtle Island. So your fight is a fight for everyone. It's our fight, it's their fight, and that's why we'll win, and that's why we need everybody on the bus.
On that note, we're going to end it over here. What was that? You're doing your Allah Akbars again? On that note, we'll end it here.
No, we're going to do some Q&A or?
Oh, a bit later. We're going to have a look at the painting first.
Oh, the painting,
and then
sorry.
After that. So on that note, we'll end the podcast over here. Thank you so much for coming on. It's an absolute privilege, and honestly, what you guys have said has been very insightful. I've learned a lot personally, and hopefully everyone here has learned, and everyone that's going to be watching, hopefully millions and billions and trillions of people that's going to watch this, could all learn something from this. So on that note, we'll end it over here. Thank you so much.